because life is so difficult, you have to do something that's truly worthwhile in order to justify it. And so, well, and that's what all these stories tell you. That's what the story of Jonah is telling you. It's like you have an ethical duty to straighten things up. And if you don't do it, you're going to be sorry. And that story is echoed everywhere. Well, now St. George, well, let's go to Harry Potter. That's what we were talking about. So he goes off to the magic castle, and he's learning to be a wizard. And he's kind of an interesting character, because he's not really good. And we find out, I think that's because, doesn't he have a piece of Voldemort in him? Isn't that what happens? Yeah. And that's what that means, is that to be good, truly good, you can't just follow rules. That's very clear in the Harry Potter story. And you also have to be able to understand malevolence. And in order to understand malevolence so that you can withstand it, you have to understand that part of you that's malevolent. Because if you don't, you're naive. And if you're naive, you're easy pickings. And so that's a Jungian idea too. And the Jungian idea is that part of personality development is to understand your shadow. And the shadow is those things about you that you do not want to admit to. And you can learn about your shadow by reading history. You know, you can read about Auschwitz. You can read about the concentration camps in Russia. And you can imagine yourself as a guard instead of as a heroic rescuer of unfortunate victims, which would be very, very unlikely. And once you can imagine yourself as a guard, which is a terrifying thing to do, then you understand something about yourself. And I actually think, and I think this is also from studying Jung, that you cannot have proper respect for yourself until you know that you're a monster, because you won't act carefully enough. You know, if you think, well, I'm a nice person, I'd never do anyone any harm, it's like, you're no saint. You can be sure of that. And the harm that you do people can come in many, many ways. And so, if you regard yourself as harmless, inoffensive, nice, well, why do you have any reason to be careful? You're like a teddy bear sitting on a shelf. Even if you throw it at someone, no one's going to get hurt. But that isn't what you're like, because you're a human being, and human beings are some vicious creatures. And there's utility in knowing that, because it's also the case, you know, in the Harry Potter series, Harry could stand up against Voldemort and understand him and speak his language because he was infected by him to some degree. A very, very interesting idea. Anyways, in the second, and the reason I'm telling you this, and this is worth thinking about, it's like, how long were each of those books? Like 500 pages? They're long, eh? And there was, how many of them? 7? And how many of them were sold? I mean, how many of you read every Harry Potter book? Right? How many of you read at least one? Okay, how many of you saw the movies? It's like, you're all in a cult. You are, I'm telling you, really, that's the truth. It's really the truth. So, in the second volume, there's this snake that's zipping around there, the basilisk, right? And it lives in the underground. That's chaos. That's chaos. And that's because wherever you are, you're on thin ice, and underneath your thin ice is chaos. And here we are in this unbelievably civilized environment, and everyone's getting along so perfectly. But you know, we've got lights, we've got electricity, the sewage system is working, no one's hungry. It's like, we can be peaceful. But if any of that fell apart, and it could easily fall apart because it's a bloody miracle it ever works at all, then the chaos that's just underneath the surface is going to come up right now. And it's useful to know that, because it makes you properly grateful. If you really understand it, it makes you properly grateful for the bloody miracle that it is that you can be here in peace. So anyways, there's this snake that's underneath the surface, and it's, you know, no joke, that thing. It's big, and it's ancient, it's always been there. And what happens if you look at it? It turns you to stone, right? It paralyzes you. Well, that's the Gorgon, that's Medusa. the woman with the head of snakes, and if you look at her, it paralyzes you. Well, what does that mean? Well, you're walking through the jungle and a big snake appears. What do? You freeze, and no bloody wonder, because you're a prey animal, and that's what they do when they see things that are going to eat them. And so the snake, well, lots of people still die from snake bite. And our ancestors were, and I mean our ancestors like, tens of millions of years ago, when they were living in trees and weren't very big, they made a nice snack for a snake. And there's a woman named Lynn Isbell, who's an anthropologist at UCLA, who's correlated the presence of carnivorous snakes with the acuity of primate vision. And what she found was that the more snakes around, the better the primates could see. So, and we're particularly good at picking up patterns like snake camouflage in the lower half of our visual quadrant. And people generally don't like snakes. You can learn to handle them, but no, snake fear appears to be innate. It's innate in chimpanzees, and it tends to increase as you age rather than decreasing. You can overcome it, but, well, my daughter had snakes, and one day her snake bit her. It was a fairly big snake, and she hadn't paid attention to it for a while, so it nailed her. And from then on, she had very difficult time grabbing the snake. It was like bitten once, shy permanently. She also told me years later, she had nightmares about snakes all the time when she had a snake in her room. It's like, and I think it was probably the smell. So, anyways. So, Harry Potter decides he's going to go after the basilisk, right? He's going to go out there and face the thing that he's most afraid of. So he does that. Way down in the depths. So it's like Jonah going down into the depths. And he faces the basilisk, and it bites him. And that's right, because if you go down into the depths, you can get bitten. Like, it's no joke. And this is a hero story, but the thing about the hero story is it's actually real. The thing that you're facing is actually dangerous. And even though facing it voluntarily might be your best bet, and is likely your best bet, because that's the central story of humanity, that doesn't mean you're going to succeed. It's the real thing. So anyways, he gets bitten, right? And he's going to die. Now, he's rescuing Ginny. So that's the St. George story. If you go after, like, dragons like to capture virgins. God only knows why. I think it's because one of the things that male humans have done from the beginning of time is chase the damn predators away. And I suspect that the males from God only knows how long ago, who were particularly good at that, were rewarded with female attention, and why the hell not? So it's deeply rooted inside of us, that idea of facing the unknown and freeing the woman. So the idea there is that it's a male idea in large part. I can talk about the central female myth, and I will as we proceed. The idea is that if you're the sort of person who can stand up against the unknown and the frightening, then you're also likely, if you develop into that sort of person, then you're also likely to develop into the sort of person that other people will find attractive.